Well, BrainWise friends, we're at the third and final segment of our Art and Science of Effective Dialogue. We hope you've enjoyed listening to how we can all become better listeners to those we're engaging in conversation with. Stay tuned for tomorrow's episode entitled The Neuroscience Digest, where we dive into the latest and greatest research being done in the field of neuroscience. Enjoy the final segment.
About expanding upon it, seeking clarity, and we talked about checking in. Hey, this is what I heard. Did I get that right? And those are all part, although physically they are a response and they're speaking, but they're part of the listening. We talked about the biological dance of listening. And so talking and telling and asking questions are all part of that dance. But I want to move us one step deeper. Is that okay?
I would love to.
And that is, we talked about listening. What's actually influencing the act of listening inside your brain? All right. And we've identified at least 8 things.
Yep.
And there's probably more. But one is when somebody says something, it triggers off a whole series. All of our cues that come in generate emotions, feelings, thoughts, and subsequently a response. So if somebody is describing something to you, which is exciting, then you're going to have a certain set of feelings and thoughts about it, and emotions. If somebody's describing something to you, which is not so lovely, then you have a different set of emotions and thoughts. So those are going through, and they're going to change your ability to actually control your response. We've mentioned a couple of times already in this discussion. So that was the first one, your emotions, feelings, and thoughts. The second one is we've talked about mental models. We all listen through filters, mental models, biases, and they are going to, in addition to missing some of the things that are communicated with us, we're now filtering some stuff out based on the conceptualizations and the inference, as opposed to what was actually said. Then we've talked a little bit about this in the past. We're not one cohesive character. So how you're going to respond to the same words on a Monday morning at 9 o'clock is probably different than how you're going to respond at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon when you're tired at the end of the day.
Right.
So you've got those 4 things. You've got your own personal threat profile. What are the topics that threaten you? So although somebody might be genuinely talking to you about something passionate about, it may actually put you in a threat state. And now how are you going to respond? The next level is, what's your own stress level? What's going on in your life? Are you worried about trying to get home because you've locked the cat and the cat's outside and up the tree? Who knows? The next level is, what's the relationship and trust level that you have with that person? If you have a high degree of relationship with them, that you're in a good relationship, a high degree of trust, you can actually respond with questions that might not be appropriate if you didn't have that level of trust. And the last one is what I call neurodiverse tendencies. If you are naturally inclined to be introverted, it might be more difficult for you to enter into those open-ended questions. So there's a whole bunch of other stuff, and we're going to go into that in a lot more detail at some point in time in the future.
Yeah. But those are some of the things that are barriers to connection. And I think if we think about our own personal experience when we're having a conversation with someone, of those items that you just shared, Phil, where is it that myself, right, or our BrainWise friends, putting ourselves in the position of where one of those barriers may be I am struggling with to really connect with someone else? Is it I'm looking for confirmation? Confirmation bias is coming in. I'm looking for things that confirm what I already believe versus exploring the areas that I may not believe or that I'm not as familiar. That could be one.
Yeah.
Another is, go ahead, Phil. Yeah.
No, that's absolutely. The bias is, we could double click on that one and go into all sorts of things. Are you part of my in-group? I'm more likely to listen to you than if you're part of my out-group. Are you part of an out-group that I actually already have an opinion about, that they are, quotes, wrong or different or whatever it might be? So all of that stuff is all going on in the background. It's a big miasma in there around how do you actually listen and then thoughtfully construct a response.
And for some people, it will take to overcome these barriers, practice and intention, a high degree of intentionality in conversation. And that's where we talk about how can you, if you're listening to another person, a way to do it is how can I summarize what they're saying in 21 words or less? Or maybe it's a couple more because you're still practicing or whatever, because you're having to acutely listen to the other person, make an understanding of what's happening, and then put it into context so that you can summarize it. And so by actively practicing that in a conversation will to some degree help us remove some of these barriers, because if you're acutely aware of what they're saying to that level of detail, it's going to be more challenging for some of these other things to come through in the dialogue. Now, they still could come through in that conversation where you're having confirmation bias or you're filtering what's happening through your own worldview, which is, I think, that becomes really critical when having a conversation with someone is, and they probably intertwine, quite honestly. My worldviews are probably somewhat influenced by my biases and vice versa. If you're listening acutely to what people are saying, it can help distract from those other things playing a part in your ability to listen.
And you mentioned a couple of key words, and I want to zero in on one of them, and that's practice. I'm not a great one for sports analogy, but let's use a sports analogy for a moment. If you find yourself not very good at golf, what do? You go out and practice. You go practice on a golf range. There's a specific place for you to go and practice. So one of many people's mental models is, oh yeah, I heard this from Cole and Phil, therefore I should get good at it very quickly. Doesn't necessarily happen. This all requires practice. If any of our listeners are saying, yeah, I'm going to do some things differently, cut yourself some slack. You're not going to get it perfect. You're not going to get it just right. But if you can notch it up one level every time and maybe find some practice person, a buddy that you can have dialogue practice with.
Right.
Lots of ways, but don't expect that you're going to listen to this for whatever it is, an hour, and then be an expert at listening.
No, you'll probably grab a couple of good tidbits that you can begin to use. And one of the things that I would say is, especially in your relationship, if you're married or you're in a committed, whatever, have a significant other, is if you recognize that after listening to this or just in general that, hey, I need to work on these areas of listening because it's sparking something, I would highly encourage you to have a vulnerable moment and actually share that with your spouse and say, I recognize that I'm having difficulty with active listening or paraphrasing or asking open-ended questions. And my commitment is X. Can you help me along that journey? Because it creates a moment of relatability. If I can be vulnerable with my spouse and say, this is what I recognize that I need to work on, and here's how I'm going to do it and where I might need assistance, it will bring you closer together. Where I think a lot of times people are fearful and they're going, I'm not going to share that because then what are they going to think? All these different things. What are they going to think of me? How are they going to approach me? And then there's also this mental model that if I say that, then that means I'm not a good spouse or I'm not a good partner, or I'm not a good husband or a good wife or whatever. The reality is we're not perfect anyways. So let's take that notion. We're never going to be perfect, never will be perfect. It's just part of the human experience. But we certainly can improve. And by creating relatability and saying, hey, let me be vulnerable and share where I believe I'm really struggling with my ability to listen, it's going to allow your spouse to go, oh my gosh, thank you so much for sharing that, blah, blah, blah. How can I help? And then it'll encourage them to do the same thing. And you'll be surprised by the degree of connection that you have after that, because you've been vulnerable and shared a part of where you're still in your growth journey.
And what I would say is ditto all that in the workspace. Because when we've taken people through coaching processes at work, one of the things we recommend is let your team know what you're working on and ask for help. Most people, if you ask them for help, they're very willing to give you.
Absolutely. And it just creates such a relatable moment of human connection because none of us are perfect. We're all working on something. And so by doing that, it does really create this powerful moment of connection with someone else.
Yep. Okay.
So, yeah.
How did we do?
Very good. Phil, let's summarize what we've talked about today, and then let's do our BrainWise moments of the week. or perhaps they're unwise moments.
So let's see. We talked about the three aspects of dialogue: asking,
Yep.
telling, and listening. We
Right.
talked about the spectrum of attention. We talked about how the different layers of listening. The first layer is about yourself. The second layer is basically about others. And then the third is all the other things that are the glue in between, what's not being said and things like that. We talked about the 8 things that are going on in the back of your head that actually will influence whether you've got the ability to keep listening or not.
Phil, what was your BrainWise moment or unwise moment from the week?
So the BrainWise moment was not a very enlightening one, but as some of you might recall, is I showed up at the doctor's last week and was actually the wrong date. So this time I did show up at 7:30 on Monday morning, on time, on the right day.
Woo! I love it. Very good.
And my other
Clean
BrainWise
bill of health?
clean bill of health.
Good.
My other BrainWise moment was when we learned on the refrigerator, which we installed just weeks ago, was not only not working, but was not repairable without major effort. When I learned that and I got the call from the representative, I actually had a BrainWise moment that I actually said, "What would you do in my situation?" And she said, "I'd probably ask for a replacement refrigerator." I said, "That's exactly what I'm doing."
Amen. I love it. That's good. That's a good one. That's very good. And my BrainWise moment from the week is, if our listeners listened to us last week, they heard that I had several pounds of laundry that I had not folded, and there were wrinkles, and it was frustrating, and it took me 45 minutes to fold them. So that's beside the point. That was my unwise moment. My BrainWise moment is this week I got back on routine. I would say it's a BrainWise half moment, and I'm going to tell you why. I got back on routine. I did the laundry and I folded it as it was coming out. All of that great, no wrinkles, except for one load. But it's okay, because that load in particular, I don't care if there's wrinkles, and that's the towels. So I got a little closer to having a very BrainWise moment of folding everything except for the towel. So there's no wrinkles in the clothes this week, but there might be wrinkles in the towel. So if that bothers someone, my apologies, but didn't get to it this week.
And my suggestion on that is, if that's the worst that happens to you in your life, you're doing okay.
Amen. Very good. Well, that is our episode for today. So I'm going to give our BrainWise friends, Phil, just a few points of reflection or reflection questions to think about as we go along our journey of becoming even more effective listeners from a neuroscience perspective. And we talked about the art of dialogue. There's 3 components of it: barriers to connection. We talked about the attention spectrum. So here are the questions. So pick a couple. We've given some BrainWise tips along this journey, but here are a couple reflection questions that you can think on as you go about your next week on where you might be in your ability to listen. So in your last disagreement, were you protecting your point or protecting connection? When someone talks to you, how do you know they're really listening? What's one distraction you can remove to make your attention a gift this week? I absolutely love that question, because attention is such a gift to the other person. How does your body tell when you're starting to get defensive? And can you catch it early on? And who in your life deserves more of your curiosity than your correction? I absolutely love that last question too. Part of it might be indicating where I'm going to reflect this week as we go along our journey. But that's our episode today on the art and science of effective dialogue. We're so glad that you continue to come along this BrainWise journey with us. If you enjoyed today's episode, we encourage you to comment, subscribe, share our podcast with others in your circle, both personally and professionally, so they too can begin to go along this journey with you and with us. And even if, it's just something that you found really interesting, like, comment, share, subscribe, review our podcast, because it helps others find us. And we want to continue to build on this community of BrainWise listeners. And if you have questions or comments, always send them in to questions@mybrainwisecoach.com. And until next week, stay curious, stay compassionate, and always stay brain.
Well, BrainWise friends, that concludes the third and final segment on the art and science of effective dialogue. We hope you learned something as you went along this journey with us. And stay tuned for tomorrow, Thursday, our Neuroscience Digest episode, where we bring you the latest and greatest in the research being done in the field of neuroscience. Talk to you soon.